Hello my fellow weirdlings, it's Margot, and today I'm talking about one of the real-life inspirations for the popular Netflix series Stranger Things, a rumored secret government experiment called the Montauk Project. If you're ready for one of the wildest stories I've ever heard, keep watching. Stranger Things is a sci-fi horror drama series on Netflix that's set in the 1980s. In the series, a group of small-town teenagers frequently find themselves solving eerie mysteries, contending with alternate dimensions, and battling monsters. If you're a fan of Stranger Things, some of the details of the Montauk Project are going to seem very familiar to you. This is because the show's creators, the Duffer Brothers, drew a lot of inspiration from the experiment. In fact, the show was originally titled Montauk and was set near Camp Hero, where the Montauk Project is said to have taken place. It was eventually relocated to Hawkins, Indiana, and renamed as Stranger Things. Despite the change of scenery, the Duffer Brothers obviously kept the Montauk Project themes heavily throughout the series. In Stranger Things, there's a character named Eleven, played by Millie Bobby Brown, who displays unusual psychokinesis and telepathic abilities, and has spent her childhood undergoing a series of experiments at a really suspicious and secretive facility called Hawkins Lab, which definitely bears a lot of similarities to the alleged underground Montauk facility. In one interview, Stranger Things star Gaten Matarazzo, who plays Dustin Henderson, stated it's based on a place in Montauk, New York called Camp Hero. There were like rumors of secret government spies doing human experiments to fight the Cold War. It's based on that one government lab. Yup, another video about the Cold War. It's become the unintended theme of this channel. I've decided to just embrace it. In my previous real-life Stranger Things video about Project MKUltra, I went into detail about what the Cold War was all about, so I'll spare you a repeat of that explanation. Project MKUltra will also be referenced sporadically throughout this video, so you might want to watch that one too if you're unfamiliar. So what exactly was the Montauk Project? To many, it's merely a bizarre and completely unbelievable conspiracy theory, but to some, it was a highly probable secret government experiment that included kidnappings, murder, torture, time travel, mind control, and alien contact, with the intention of developing psychological warfare techniques. It's been said that there were anywhere from 100,000 to 300,000 civilian test subjects over the course of the project. While there isn't a whole lot of physical proof as of yet, many people are convinced that the government performed experiments similar to those portrayed in Stranger Things at a military base called Camp Hero and the Montauk Air Force Station on the eastern tip of Long Island, New York, and was actually most active in the 1980s, after the base was officially closed. As far as conspiracy theories go, this is one of the more intriguing ones. It manages to combine pretty much every sort of conspiracy theory into one big, hopelessly tangled conspiracy clusterfudge. I'll make my best attempt to untangle it here. The original base dates back to the Revolutionary War. It was used by the U.S. in World War I and World War II to house massive gun emplacements to deter enemy attacks from the ocean. The base, with its beautiful panoramic views of the Atlantic Ocean, was disguised by the Army as a fishing village, with Cape Cod-style houses complete with fake wood siding and painted on windows, to fool the Nazis. In the 1950s, during the Cold War, it was used as a radar center to anticipate Soviet attacks from the Atlantic. Following World War II, the site was taken over by the Air Force, who remained in control of it until 1981, when it was permanently decommissioned. According to conspiracy theorists, it was at that point that the really atrocious experiments began. According to self-proclaimed survivors of the Montauk Project, there was actually another enormous facility hidden below public view. This is where the more controversial experiments are said to have taken place. This facility is said to have at one point consisted of a dozen levels, most of them underground, and employed hundreds of workers. The reportedly decommissioned military base was off limits to the public and well protected against trespassers. Deemed environmentally important due to its ecosystems and animal life, the base was donated to the National Park Service in 1984, though it was still closed to the public. Ownership was eventually transferred to the New York State Parks Department, and Camp Hero State Park finally opened to the public in 2002. The origins of the Montauk Project conspiracy are admittedly pretty sketchy. The Montauk narrative gained popularity in 1992, 11 years after the base was permanently closed, with a self-published book by Preston B. Nichols called The Montauk Project: Experiments in Time. Nichols was born on Long Island in 1946 and claimed to have degrees in engineering, psychology, and parapsychology, none of which have been confirmed, though he did work in electrical engineering, so that one seems likely. Nichols' book was co-written by author, publisher, and Scientologist Vincent Barbarick under the pen name Peter Moon. They went on to write 3 more Montauk books together. The series is categorized as science fiction, though they claimed the stories were based on Nichols' actual experiences at Montauk. While there were already rumors that the American military had been conducting questionable experiments at Montauk, at least as far back as the mid-1980s, Nichols' book was the catalyst for turning it into a full-blown conspiracy theory. Nichols claimed he wrote the book after recovering memories of his time as a Project Montauk researcher. In the book, Nichols detailed the interior of the facilities, procedures, and advanced technologies used there. He also described numerous paranormal incidents he claims to have witnessed there. Nichols' claims appeared to be completely outlandish, but after the book's publication, others came forward to say they, too, had participated in the Montauk Project's illicit research experiments. While the book is now widely debunked, there are many who believe there is some basis in fact to Nichols' stories, so I thought we should go over some of them and decide for ourselves. One of the assertions in Nichols' first Montauk book was that the Montauk Project was funded by Nazi gold recovered during World War II, and by Nazi gold he's probably referring to the gold the Nazis stole from the Jews during the Holocaust. Nichols also disclosed that Nazi scientists recruited by the U.S. during Operation Paperclip worked at the facility. He also claimed that leading up to this point, researchers had attempted in the 1950s to study the psychological effects of electromagnetic fields. One of the goals was to induce schizophrenia at the touch of a button. But the U.S. Congress rejected the continuation of the experiments because they deemed them too dangerous, so they ended up being conducted in secret and funded by the stolen gold instead. When the gold ran out, there was purportedly backup funding from the Freemasons and the mob. Of course, there's no way to prove any of this. None of these groups are known for being big on filing paperwork. Nichols further alleged that these experiments were eventually picked up by the U.S. government in the 1960s at the Brookhaven National Laboratory on Long Island, which was then known for its experiments with atomic energy and has plenty of other conspiracies and urban legends associated with it. But after realizing the project would require a very large radar dish, it was moved to the Air Force facility at Montauk. The project's high-tech equipment was moved to Camp Hero to an underground bunker. One thing we do know for certain is that a SAGE radar tower was erected at the Montauk military base in 1960. SAGE stands for Semi-Automatic Ground Environment. The imposing structure was once a mother station to a series of smaller manned radar towers located in the Atlantic Ocean along the east coast of the U.S. This network of towers was intended to provide a 30-minute warning in the event of a Soviet nuclear attack. The antennae reportedly emitted up to 425 megahertz when operational, coincidentally the same frequency that's allegedly required to disrupt the human brain and enter human consciousness. Even locals who don't subscribe to the secret underground base theories admit the tower was strong enough that its frequent rotation would interfere with their TV sets and other electronics and cause their animals to freak out. They also claim that many people in the vicinity of Montauk suffered from chronic headaches and bad dreams. One skeptical local, a resident of over 40 years, is quoted as saying, "I don't want to add fuel to the fire because I don't believe in all that zombie stuff, but the impact that tower had on the town was real. I don't know if it affected our thoughts like some people say, but it was a force." I can definitely see why Preston Nichols took a keen interest in this tower. In the 1970s and 80s, Nichols led the psychotronic movement, which claimed that the government used electromagnetic waves to plant thoughts in people's heads. The followers of this movement also claim that Nichols was able to control the weather, which they consider proof of the government's similar capabilities. Some of them also still wear pots and pans on their heads to block microwaves. But government experiments with mind control are certainly not outside of the realm of possibility, considering we know for a fact that they were conducting Project MKUltra on unsuspecting American civilians at the same time that Montauk Sage Tower was active. Of the 12 Sage Towers that were once scattered across the U.S., Camp Heroes is the only one that remains. It's now a National Historic Site, and the 90-foot-tall concrete tower with its 40-foot-wide steel dish is a highly recognizable Long Island landmark visible for miles. Though the tower is no longer active, the dish has been reported to mysteriously change positions by about 90 to 180 degrees at a time, though everything seems to be rusted solidly in place. Most believers of the Montauk Project conspiracy theory trace the project's origins back to a more famous event that took place in October of 1943, known as the Philadelphia Experiment. This is also an unproven and largely debunked conspiracy theory, but the popular narrative is that this covert experiment was conducted by the U.S. military at a naval shipyard in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, as part of the CIA's Project Rainbow. The objective was to discover a way to make their ships invisible to Nazi radar during World War II using electromagnetic fields, so they could safely transport supplies to the Allies in Europe. According to conspiracy theorists as far back as 1955, they not only achieved their goal, they also accidentally managed to render a battleship, the USS Eldridge, completely invisible to the naked eye. In fact, they seemingly sent it to another time or dimension. Nobody really knows for sure, and it appeared briefly in Norfolk, Virginia, more than 200 miles away. The ship allegedly went somewhere, somehow, with disastrous consequences. When the USS Eldridge reappeared at the Philadelphia shipyard several minutes later, some of the crew members were found fused into the ship's bulkheads. Others had rematerialized inside out. Those who survived were driven insane by the disorientation of apparently briefly existing outside of space-time. After seeing the negative effects of the USS Eldridge's crew's exposure to their very own version of the Stranger Things upside down, the military ended the project. This is a very popular story that many do actually accept as historical fact. However, aside from blatant violations of the established laws of physics, it seems that no two retellings of the Philadelphia experiment story are the same. And there are people who served on the USS Eldridge in 1943 who dispute the story entirely. The U.S. Navy, as expected, has never admitted to the Philadelphia experiment taking place. So what does this have to do with the Montauk Project? Basically, everything. In 1984, a movie titled The Philadelphia Experiment was adapted from an earlier book about the conspiracy theory. In the movie, the ship's 1943 crew finds itself blinked 40 years into the future to 1983, where they find that the Philadelphia experiment has been revived. A 57-year-old man named Alfred Al Bielek eventually saw this movie in 1988 and claimed to be overwhelmed with an intense feeling of déjà vu. After undergoing various New Age therapies, Bielek recovered repressed memories involving time travel and his involvement in both the Philadelphia experiment and the Montauk Project, indicating a link between the two. These recovered memories told a rather convoluted story of Bielek actually being born with the name Edward Cameron. Cameron worked on the Philadelphia experiment with his brother Duncan Cameron when they were both in their mid-20s in 1943. His identity had been changed when his memories had been locked away to protect the confidentiality of the experiment. He also remembered later working on the Montauk Project in the 1970s and 80s. How he said he got there added even more layers to this epic tale. Bielek claimed that sometime in the 1940s, famed physicist and inventor Nikola Tesla figured out how to make the USS Eldridge invisible to enemy radar. In the process, he inadvertently opened up a wormhole into the future that sucked in the battleship with the Cameron brothers on board. The brothers managed to jump off the ship when the experiment began to go awry and landed at Montauk's Camp Hero 40 years in the future on August 12, 1983. The military immediately sent them back through the wormhole to 1943 with the mission of destroying the time travel equipment on the USS Eldridge. That mission was completed, but Duncan jumped back through the wormhole just before it closed, returning to 1983. According to Bielek, when Duncan jumped back to 1983, he lost his time lock, which caused him to age rapidly at the rate of a year per hour, and he died within a few days. The U.S. government continued their experiments, building more portals into the future. Edward Cameron carried on as usual until 1947, when he was contacted by Montauk Project researchers who transported him back or forward again to 1983. Bielek claims that when the project was done with him, they erased his memory using MK-Ultra mind control techniques and shipped him back into the past with a new identity, a new set of parents, and a complete cover story. In 1990, Bielek told his story at the Mutual UFO Network conference, and it got even weirder. According to Bielek, in 1951, at the behest of the Montauk Project, he, as Edward Cameron, convinced his father, a member of the Illuminati, to have another child, so they could port his brother Duncan's consciousness from 1983 into his new sibling, born in 1963. Bielek referred to this version of Duncan as a walk-in soul. As Bielek's story spread, it of course grabbed the attention of Preston Nichols, who befriended Bielek. That's how the story usually goes. Though others claim it was Nichols that got Bielek's attention after talking about Montauk at a 1986 panel at a U.S. Psychotronics Association conference, a panel which Duncan Cameron actually joined him on. But there's also proof that Bielek and Nichols were friends before that, and that they'd previously gone to the Montauk base together, according to photos from that 1986 panel presentation. It seems pretty likely to me that they cooked this whole story up together. As for the plausibility that any of Bielek's story is true, the facts are that the Philadelphia experiment took place in 1943. Bielek was born in 1927, which would have made him 16 years old at the time. But he claims Edward Cameron was born in 1916, with his brother Duncan being born in 1917, and that both brothers were engineers with the Navy. The USS Eldridge's crew manifests show no Camerons on board during that time frame. Bielek had a website with the entire Cameron brothers timeline written out, accompanied by a photo of Edward Cameron. But a skeptic, I use that term very loosely here, named Marshall Barnes and several associates later proved that the photo was stolen from a Princeton yearbook. Marshall Barnes is kind of a crackpot in his own right, in my opinion, but I think he got it right that time. He proved there was at least some level of deception going on there. Intriguingly, Bielek actually claimed that he'd first become friends with Nichols 2 decades before that, in the 1970s, when they were both working for the Montauk Project, and Bielek was still Edward Cameron. I'm just going to keep calling him Bielek throughout this video. This is confusing enough already. Nichols himself claimed to have been teleported to Montauk in 1968 to work on the Sage radar tower. Bielek's story got even more bizarre when he said he and Nichols had invented something in the 1970s called the Montauk Chair, a mind-reading device that was a central component of the entire project. This fills in the specifics of Nichols' previously forgotten research, which he detailed in his book. Nichols claimed the Montauk Chair used electromagnetism to amplify the psychic powers of anyone who sat in it. It turned out that Duncan Cameron, the new walk-in soul Duncan, not the 1940s Duncan, had extraordinary psychic abilities, including an uncanny ability to manifest objects with his mind while sitting in the Montauk Chair. So he became the main focus of the experiments. This is somewhat similar to the experiments that are done with Eleven in Stranger Things to open the portal to the Upside Down. Nichols and Bielek, along with other Montauk Project researchers, supposedly used the Montauk Chair to open their own portals through time-space and alternate dimensions. According to Nichols, whatever someone sitting in the Montauk Chair envisioned would appear on a transmitter screen, then be manifested into the real world in either a solid or transparent form. That'll be important later. Nichols described another experiment in his book that's pretty similar to remote viewing, another paranormal concept that was researched by the CIA during the Stargate project in the 1970s and 80s. It's also another concept that's included in the Stranger Things storyline, when Eleven goes into the void to see what other people are doing. Nichols wrote, "The first experiment was called the seeing eye. With a lock of a person's hair or other appropriate object in his hand, Duncan could concentrate on the person and be able to see it as if he was seeing through their eyes, hearing through their ears, and feeling through their body. He could actually see through other people anywhere on the planet." The most disturbing claim made by Nichols, Bielek, and others is that of the abduction of thousands of young children, some no older than 4, who were kept underground at the facility for various experiments. Nichols called these abductees the Montauk Boys, claiming they were runaways, snatched off the streets, or even sometimes taken from their homes. This reminds me of the test subjects at the Hawkins lab in Stranger Things, and specifically how Vecna, or Henry Creel, came to be there. Most of the Montauk Boys were blonde, blue-eyed, and tall with light skin, fitting the Aryan stereotype, because that's what the Nazis associated with the Montauk Project liked. Nichols said the children were abused so horribly, physically, psychologically, and sometimes sexually, that most of them forgot everything about their time at Camp Hero for the rest of their lives. It's said that the objective of these experiments on young boys, called the Montauk Boys program, was to put them through a series of tests using large amounts of hallucinogenic drugs and powerful electromagnetic frequencies that would heighten their psychic abilities and turn them into subliminally programmed super soldiers. Many of these boys were said to have been sent through the space-time portal. There are also rumors of other experiments being conducted on kidnapped homeless people of various ages, who endured tremendous blasts of electromagnetic radiation to see how it affected them psychologically. Most of them reportedly died. Mind control experiments were also reportedly performed on multiple U.S. Army units who were sent to scenic Montauk under the guise of R&R, or rest and recuperation. Their covert testing eventually expanded to include random townspeople from Long Island, New Jersey, upstate New York, and Connecticut. All of this allegedly took place beneath the radar tower, in secret laboratories connected by a series of tunnels, and may have gone on over the course of up to 4 decades. Since Nichols' first Montauk book was published, multiple men have come forward with their own recovered memories, claiming to have been among those Montauk Boys. One of those men is named Stewart Swerdlow. Swerdlow was 52 years old in 2017 when he said in an interview, quote, "When the experiment started, they'd target expendable boys, like orphans, runaways, or the children of drug addicts, the kind of kids no one would really come looking for. The aim was to fracture your mind so they could program you. They'd change the temperature from very hot to very cold, starve you, then overfeed you. I remember being beaten with a wooden pole. And they loved to hold your head underwater until you nearly drowned. That was effective. It makes a person likely to listen to and obey their rescuer. They also used LSD to put our brains into an altered state." He went on to say of the Montauk Chair, "In the early days, as they were perfecting the coordinates, a lot of the boys were simply lost. I still have nightmares about it today. I wasn't there when the Montauk Chair was shut off, but I felt it, like I had suddenly been unplugged from electricity." Swerdlow also claimed to have witnessed project staffers sexually abusing some of the other boys to break them down, and he made the allegation that he and other Montauk Boys were sent to Mars and back to biblical times using the project's time-space portals. He claims only about 1% of the Montauk Boys survived, and that he became a programmer of the boys because of his exceptional psychic powers. I found a little bit of information about Stewart Swerdlow. Much like Preston Nichols, he's seemingly prone to hyperbole. He's been known to embellish even the most mundane stories about his life, including his assertion that he has alien DNA. I suppose I can't prove he doesn't, but I do take everything he says with a large grain of salt. According to the HumanException.com's extensive research, Nichols and Swerdlow have been connected since at least 1991, when Nichols was allegedly helping Swerdlow recover memories of his childhood abductions. During their sessions, they found that Swerdlow was abducted by 16 alien species. Swerdlow also remembers that one of the villains of the Montauk Project was named Hans von Gruber. Yeah, kinda like the character in Die Hard. He also claims to have been sent on a mission to meet Jesus Christ, remove a sample of his blood, and then kill him. According to Swerdlow, after Jesus willingly gave the blood sample, Swerdlow emptied a revolver into him. Do with that information what you will. Stewart Swerdlow also has a criminal history of embezzlement, though he blames the government for brainwashing him into committing the crime and claims to have no memory of it. He's worked this into the Montauk narrative as part of the government's persistent efforts to shut him up. He pled guilty but later claimed to have been coerced. He was sentenced to 33 months in prison. He's known to threaten litigation against anyone who discusses this online. Swerdlow and his wife Janet now run what can best be described as a cult, in my opinion, and they apparently make pretty good money at it, while spreading irresponsible conspiracy theories and satanic panic. Another former Montauk boy to come forward is Joe Loffreno. Loffreno has worked as a parks employee at Camp Hero for about 20 years. In a 2020 interview with the New York Post, he said, "It's a place that's dominated my life and my nightmares. I didn't believe it until 2 years ago. I was hypnotized by a certified hypnotist for about 40 minutes, and all of these memories flooded back. They did a very bad thing to us out there. We were just little kids. They had no right to experiment on us. It was a very dark, very evil thing." Loffreno grew up in Montauk. Under hypnosis, he recalled that he was abducted and abused during the summer of 1980, and possibly during the summer of 1981, when he was 12 or 13. He said a local boy who nobody knew very well had invited him to bike to the military base. The first time, there were 2 men waiting, dressed in civilian clothes. They took the boys to a sunken house on the base. Later, he and other boys were brought underground through Battery 113, one of the sealed gunneries left over from World War II. He remembers lying on a table with wires coming out of him, like electrodes. He said, "They analyzed us like animals." He claims there were up to 50 other kids there, and believes some of them were later killed. While under hypnosis, Loffreno went to the location he remembered with another parks employee and found remnants of the sunken house. Loffreno has said, "If we had a backhoe and my boss let me dig in that spot, I can guarantee we'd find some cement structures down there." I couldn't find a whole lot of information on Joe Loffreno. He seems fairly ordinary, all things considered. These stories all sound pretty unbelievable, but in 2014, a filmmaker named Christopher Garetano, who grew up near Montauk, made a documentary called Montauk Chronicles, wherein he documented the claims of Preston Nichols, Al Bielek, and Stewart Swerdlow. At first, he didn't find their stories very believable, but he seemingly wanted to give them a fair investigation. Garetano hired a geophysicist to analyze the ground beneath the former Montauk military base, and found evidence of large underground structures not recorded on official blueprints. He claims to have found one anomaly in the readings that suggested a reinforced concrete bunker buried 20 feet deep and measuring about 20 to 30 feet in diameter. Garetano said, "The more I researched, the more I began to believe it's not so ludicrous. We know there was military interest in paranormal phenomena. MKUltra used vulnerable people like prisoners, so why is it so far-fetched that orphans or runaway boys would be targeted? They seem exactly the sort of subjects who would be easy to take, and Montauk would be the ideal facility. In the winter, it's like a ghost town." He also said, quote, "Forget all the alien and MKUltra crap. I think there was some type of experimentation out there using kids or teenagers, maybe runaways from New York. The official word is that there's nothing underground, but I really think there's something to hide there." End quote. Now, I read through a 154-page document that was filed before turning the base into a state park. There were a lot of buildings demolished at that time, and the plans even mentioned imploding a few above-ground bunkers, backfilling with dirt, and leaving the resulting mounds to be part of the landscape. They also were removing multiple huge 1,000-gallon and 25,000-gallon underground fuel storage tanks. And even before that, when the base changed hands decades earlier, they'd removed some unsafe or obsolete structures. I'd be more surprised if they didn't find any concrete underground. I'm not saying what they saw was surely the result of previous demolition, and I'd assume they took that into consideration, but I'd be remiss not to mention it. Montauk has also been called New York's Area 51, due to rumors that aliens were held there in underground bunkers. Testimonials from purported Montauk survivors mention encountering alien life forms, everything from the classic grayskins to giant lizard people and extra-dimensional humanoid beings made of hollow glass. Some of the Montauk Project's experiments were said to have the purpose of reverse engineering alien technology. Because of this, the current Camp Hero State Park has become a target for people convinced there are spaceships, and possibly even extraterrestrials, hidden underground there. It's claimed that Montauk researchers encountered friendly extraterrestrials through the time tunnel who generously shared their technology, leading to the development of experimental flying saucers at Camp Hero. Camp Hero was officially shut down in 1981. So how did it end? Nichols and Bielek had a really interesting story about that, too. Nichols said he continued his experiments with the new version of Duncan Cameron and the other Montauk Boys in the Montauk Chair. After several years of this, Nichols claimed they could reliably travel to other times and places, even to Mars, as Stewart Swerdlow asserted. Eventually, they were able to program Duncan with basic commands that could be performed psychically away from the chair. Nichols claimed that at one point, Duncan physically willed an entire building to appear on the base. He also claimed Duncan could implant specific thoughts into other people's minds, could move or destroy objects all the way in the center of town, and that he could drive animals into town or start a remote crime wave. Nichols claimed that, quote, "One day all the animals in the woods raced into town, mooing and crying out in terror. Locals say this never happened." At one point, Nichols' superiors ordered him to turn on the Montauk Chair and leave it running through August 12, 1983. By having this second time travel machine switched on, the Montauk Project successfully created the time wormhole to 1943. This explains how 1943's Edward and Duncan Cameron came through the portal to Montauk in 1983. Nichols did his best to keep the Duncan Cameron of 1943 away from his 1983 counterpart, but realized time travel was far too complex and dangerous to keep playing with. This is when he and 3 colleagues decided it was time to end the project forever. They devised a plan of rebellion involving the replacement Duncan Cameron. Nichols said, quote, "We finally decided we'd had enough of the whole experiment. The contingency program was activated by someone approaching Duncan while he was in the chair and simply whispering, 'The time is now.' At this moment, he let loose a monster from his subconscious, and the transmitter actually portrayed a hairy monster. It was big, hairy, hungry, and nasty. But it didn't appear underground in the null point. It showed up somewhere on the base. It would eat anything it could find, and it smashed everything in sight. Several different people saw it, but almost everyone described a different beast." End quote. This probably inspired the manifestation of the Stranger Things Demogorgon, at least a little bit. According to Nichols, they had to smash all of the equipment that powered the Montauk Chair to remove the creature from existence and send it back to its own dimension. This happened simultaneously with the original 1943 Cameron brothers being sent back to the USS Eldridge with orders to destroy the equipment there. The hairy beast, now nicknamed Junior by conspiracy theorists, disappeared into nothingness. Employees were then brainwashed using MK-Ultra techniques to forget their work on the project entirely. All incriminating evidence was removed, and the underground levels of the facility were filled with cement. Preston Nichols and Peter Moon's Montauk book series also made some other allegations about the site and the Montauk Project. These included that the AIDS virus was created in a laboratory at Montauk, that the Montauk Project was led by Nikola Tesla, who faked his own death in 1943 and moved to Long Island in the 1970s, that the time tunnel developed at Montauk allowed researchers to travel anywhere in time or space. This included altering the outcome of both the Civil War and World War II, and that the infamous Men in Black were developed at Montauk, as well as the mysterious black helicopters known to make an appearance in many conspiracy theories, which also used the facility as a landing base. The Montauk Project also created superhumans, and serums designed to turn regular humans into superhumans. Creatures of urban legends such as the Jersey Devil were supposedly created at Montauk. Nichols even claimed that the supposed moon landing hoax of 1969 was filmed at Montauk. They've also taken credit for the assassination of JFK and the extinction of the dinosaurs. The list just goes on and on. This is where Nichols veers a little bit too far into QAnon-style conspiracy for my liking, just throwing every ludicrous conspiracy theory at the wall to see what will stick and get people on board. Stewart Swerdlow actually claims to have some sort of inside knowledge of QAnon. In one interview, he said, "The Q movement, as I have subsequently found in the past year or so, is legitimate." He claims Q is a small group made up of deep military intelligence and extraterrestrials to end the deep state, and that it's all connected to the stories he's been telling over the years. This really doesn't help his credibility. Nichols also constantly claimed his life was at risk and that someone was trying to shut him up. He reported multiple assassination attempts against him, though none of them were proven to be real. There's no way I could cover all of Preston Nichols or Stewart Swerdlow's tall tales in this video. We'd be here all day. But the truth is, there are some mysterious things still going on in the general area of Montauk. In July of 2008, an unidentified animal carcass washed ashore at Ditch Plains, a popular surfing beach on the Montauk Peninsula, just 4 miles west of Camp Hero. It was quickly dubbed the Montauk Monster. Long story short, 3 young women spotted the beast and snapped a photo of the hairless, bloated, bruised, and somewhat scorched carcass. The photo soon went viral. Nobody could agree on what the creature in the picture actually was. But by the time that picture reached the public, the carcass had disappeared. Locals refused to comment on its whereabouts for the most part. Over time, a couple people would say it had been buried in the backyard of an undisclosed residence. It was described as no bigger than a cat. One man claimed he'd intended to let the carcass decompose, then give the bones to a photographer friend for an art project. Lauren Coleman, the world's leading cryptozoologist, is convinced the Montauk Monster was actually a decomposing raccoon, with bloating and skin slippage from being in the water. This matches up with another person's story that they'd found a dead raccoon and given it a Viking funeral. Coleman also mentioned that the Montauk Monster photos started a trend of cryptid sightings, with other Montauk Monsters suddenly being spotted all around the world. But many believe the Montauk Monster to be an escaped experiment from nearby Plum Island, a highly secretive animal research facility with some rather Montauk Project-like rumors of its own. Plum Island is the government's secretive animal disease center. Most notably, there's a persistent rumor that Lyme disease was originally created there, considering it's located suspiciously close to Old Lyme, Connecticut, where the disease first appeared. Does it not seem a little strange that there would be so many secretive government facilities in one little area of Long Island? There is another plausible reason for the Montauk Project rumors that have run amok since the 1980s, and another explanation for Garetano's evidence of what would appear to be underground structures below the base. A Montauk area local named Paul Fagan spent 14 years exploring Camp Hero and scouring government documents at the National Archives in Manhattan. He believed there may actually be a nuclear reactor secretly buried at the site installed around 1958 as part of the Cold War-era Army nuclear power program. His theory was that the conspiracy theorists about Camp Hero may actually have been planted by the U.S. government to deflect attention from the possible reactor. The U.S. government, as expected, has denied the existence of the Montauk Project, but they also denied their research into mind control and remote viewing with Project MKUltra and Project Stargate, until those research documents were declassified. The American government is no stranger to secret military experiments with unsuspecting civilian test subjects. In 1932, the Public Health Service began what they called the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male, in which 600 black men, 399 of whom had syphilis, were observed and actively denied treatments for the disease. After World War II, the U.S. aggressively recruited Nazi scientists, many of whom had performed atrocious human experiments in Hitler's concentration camps, as part of Operation Paperclip. These Nazis were then employed in the U.S.'s own inhumane human experiments, so it's certainly possible they could have been involved at the Montauk military base in some capacity. Sub-Project 119 of Project MKUltra was the U.S. government's initial electromagnetic program. It was, quote, a critical review of activation of human behavior by remote means. Subproject 54 of MKUltra attempted to create a perfect concussion program where suboral frequency blasts would erase human memory to cause temporary amnesia, apparently using ultrasound. Other experiments tried to, quote, produce shock and confusion over extended periods of time and capable of surreptitious use. As author and journalist Steve Volk said in the History Channel's The Dark Files regarding the Montauk Project, the reason that Americans are so interested in conspiracy theories is that conspiracies happen. Unfortunately, there are also those out there who prey on people that are susceptible to believing every conspiracy they hear about. Many people, including Montauk area locals who don't believe all of the conspiracy theories, do suspect there was more to the Montauk military base than meets the eye. One very good reason for that is written in the property's deed. When the deed to Camp Hero was transferred from the U.S. government to the New York State Department of Parks and Recreation, the paperwork specifically stipulated that while New York State would own everything on the surface of the base, the government retained ownership of everything below the surface. That wordage really seems to lend credence to the theories that there's something mysterious below ground at Camp Hero. Local Chamber of Commerce President Paul Monty is quoted as saying, "No doubt the stories have been embellished, but I don't doubt that things went on there in the Cold War years. Even today the base is patrolled and watched. They obviously don't want people in there even now." Some locals also lament the fact that the conspiracy theories draw so many gawkers to the site who ignore the legitimate military history of the area. Before Camp Hero became a state park, local Brian Minnick and his friends managed to explore inside of the radar tower. I've seen interior photos from other urban explorers as well. What Minnick found were various documents as well as sealed entrances that could suggest the infrastructure of the base is more complex than the official blueprints admit. Minnick explored an underground tunnel that led to a heavy door with a heavy wheel on it like a bank vault. The abandoned documents also suggested that the base operated for far longer than the government would have us believe. Minnick and his friends found records of mass quantities of food ordered to the base in the late 1980s, years after the military officially decommissioned the facility. Like $80,000 a month worth of food. Montauk conspiracy believers also cite Minnick's photos of brightly painted rooms with psychedelic patterned wallpaper as evidence of the captive Montauk Boys' existence, and that they were probably subjected to LSD tests in so-called acid rooms. Minnick said in the Dark Files, "There were a lot of strange things, and the sum total of all those strange things is compelling." Nichols' co-writer on the Montauk books, Vincent Barbarick, aka Peter Moon, told the New York Post, "We're dealing with phenomena that's not just 3D. If you research sacred geometry, Montauk is known for being a power vortex. Geologically, it's an underground mountain that comes up. It's its own separate island in a way. Something happened out there, that I'm sure of." Peter Bove, author of the novel Montauk Time and a former Manhattan advertising executive, has said, "I believe it's entirely possible that the human experiment stories are true. Scientifically, physiologically, it's all conceivably real. I believe there were Army experiments out there that involved interdimensional travel, and the fallout from that still exists, like a tear in the space-time continuum. Having said that, there's no hard evidence that I've seen to prove it." Bove has spent summers in the Montauk area since childhood and says he knows just about everyone in town. Paul Fagan once said, "So many people, including me, who spent any time looking into Camp Hero ended up completely different people afterwards. It's a strange coincidence, but I've seen it happen to multiple people. I got so squirrely I had to leave town for a while. All I can say is the imagination is one hell of a machine that can affect you to the point where you no longer know what's true and what isn't." And on that note, one thing that struck me is that these recovered memories of the Montauk Project were all seemingly unearthed using methods like hypnosis. I'm old enough to remember when something called false memory syndrome and recovered memory therapy were in the news. In psychology, false memory syndrome, or FMS, describes a condition in which a person's identity and relationships are affected by false memories, recollections that are factually incorrect yet strongly believed. The principle that individuals can hold false memories and the role that outside influence can play on their formation is widely accepted by scientists, though FMS isn't officially recognized as a psychiatric illness in any medical manuals. False memory syndrome may be the result of recovered memory therapy, a term coined in the early 1990s, which describes a range of therapy methods that are supposed to help a patient recover repressed memories from possible previously forgotten trauma, but are prone to creating false memories instead. Because of this, repressed memory, known by the diagnostic term dissociative amnesia, has long been controversial in psychiatry. During the 1980s, there were a spate of highly publicized court cases due to claims of childhood sexual abuse based on repressed memories that were recovered using these sort of recovered memory therapy techniques. In many cases, the evidence just didn't match up to the claims, though many of the accused were imprisoned regardless. This was also part of the greater satanic panic, mass hysteria phenomenon, which I'll be going into in my next video about the real-life inspirations behind Stranger Things. In the early 1990s, a number of the supposed victims retracted their allegations, admitting they'd been influenced by therapeutic techniques, often as impressionable children. This also sucks because there are real victims of childhood abuse who repress painful memories as a coping mechanism. When those memories come to the surface, they need to be taken seriously. I think the evidence points to many of the stories from supposed Montauk survivors being untrue, though if we give them the benefit of the doubt that they haven't completely fabricated this for attention or unknown motives, I think there could be an argument that the therapeutic techniques many of them use to retrieve these memories may have led to false ones being implanted. But my healthy distrust of the government and knowledge of really far-fetched government conspiracies that turned out to be completely true block me from being able to write this off completely. All of the men behind the key Montauk Project lore have stuck to their stories as far as I know of, though they do have trouble keeping them straight with each retelling. And the reborn Duncan Cameron did seem to pull back from it a bit in late 1997, retracting many of his statements on the abuse of the Montauk Boys, claiming to only have knowledge of time travel and interdimensional technologies. Nichols and his co-writer Vincent Barbaric attributed this to Cameron being under a new form of mind control by a recent female companion and her associates. It wasn't long before Cameron was supporting the entire Montauk Project narrative again. He appeared at conventions right up until 2017 and offered online psychic services for things like personal energy clearing, home clearing, and couples therapy. Duncan Cameron died in 2019. Between 1981 and 1999, Preston Nichols hosted many panels at USPA conferences on topics related to fringe science and radio technology. He died in 1998. Alfred Bielek once claimed he'd given interviews about his Montauk experiences to over 50 radio and TV shows and spoke at over 50 conventions. He died in 2007. Vincent Barbaric, aka Peter Moon, is still the owner of Sky Books, the company that published his and Nichols' Montauk series. He also has a website called the Time Travel Education Center, which appears to be pretty partial to L. Ron Hubbard. Interestingly, he also claims that the Montauk Project's Cameron brothers are related to both L. Ron Hubbard and the sadistic Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron of MKUltra fame. Today, much of the decommissioned facilities at Camp Hero are still standing, as sort of a spooky ghost town in scenic surroundings. The Sage Radar Tower is still used as a noticeable, albeit creepy landmark for boats sailing around the fork of Long Island. Now a state park, it draws nearly 400,000 visitors per year, from urban explorers to curious locals and family outings to military enthusiasts and alien and conspiracy fanatics. Most people seem to agree that it's a rather strange state park. Many say something doesn't feel right about the place. But I suppose that could be attributed to all of the do not enter, danger, and no trespassing signs around the crumbling boarded-up buildings, or being on constant video surveillance, or the brochures they hand out to visitors to instruct them on what to do if they happen across an unexploded ordnance, bomb, landmine, bullet, grenade, or otherwise. Or maybe it's the presence of manhole covers and grates when there isn't supposed to be anything underground. Or the unsettlingly persistent reports that the officially inactive base still draws military levels of electricity. And it certainly doesn't help that some visitors claim you can still hear screams from the abandoned tunnels. In my opinion, Nichols, Barbarick, Bielek, Swerdlow, and Duncan Cameron were all hoaxers, but there could very well be more than meets the eye at Montauk. In fact, some people believe they're all part of a government disinformation team, organized to spread lies, distortions, and half-truths to disguise the true nature of the Montauk Project and others like it. I really can't think of a better way to convince the public to doubt this story than to have those guys talk about it for 30 years. But they've attracted a lot of supporters along the way. The loudest of those supporters and true believers in the Montauk Project often tend to have their own histories of lying, fraud and other crimes, publicity stunts, or involvement in cults, making them appear to not be the most believable witnesses. But of course, they all say that's due to the government's efforts to silence and discredit them. Since the publication of the first Montauk book, dozens if not hundreds of people have claimed to have first-hand knowledge of the Montauk Project from their own recovered memories, and each of those people seems to add another new conspiracy theory into the mix. And with each new online post about it, or podcast discussing it, or video like this one, more people fall into the Montauk rabbit hole. There are many people out there who are convinced these government mind control experiments are still going on today at another secret facility or even at Montauk itself. I wouldn't say that's impossible. Well, maybe the at Montauk part. Though we always have to be careful with conspiracy theories. They can be a very slippery slope into unhealthy obsession and a refusal to employ critical thinking skills. We're seeing a lot of that lately, and I don't want to contribute to it. So, as always, take everything with a grain of salt, do your own research, and if something sounds too crazy to be true, it most likely is, until proven otherwise. That's all I have for you today. I hope you've enjoyed this topic and will come back for more. Like, subscribe, leave a comment, and bring your friends, family, COVID pod, cult members, invisible friends, or enemies. And if you have any thoughts about this, leave them in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching.